Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Milwaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Here's one of our favorite conversations about what's happening in the city.
How to Evict Your Landlord is a 3-part series produced by WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez and Lake Effect's Sam Woods. In parts 1 and 2, we learned about out-of-state landlord David Tomblin. He owns over 200 rental properties in Milwaukee and is fighting lawsuits that threaten to cut him off from rental income. We also learned about how his tenants united against him and the city's case for declaring his business model a public nuisance. Today, we examine how the city has tried similar strategies for dealing with negligent landlords in the past, and we finally speak with the man himself, David Tomblin. This is the third and final part of How to Evict Your Landlord.
Calling case number 25 CB 854 U.S. Bank Trust National Association versus RPR.
Early this March, we stopped by Milwaukee's courthouse.
We wanted to drop in on the most recent hearing of U.S. Bank's lawsuit against corporate landlord David Tomblin and his company, Highgrove Holdings.
Good afternoon again, gentlemen.
So this room is impressively large, very ornate. The air was stale. And Sam, we were the only 2 people in the room, besides the people that were paid to be there.
We sure were, and all we knew back then was that the bank was suing Tomblin. The total bill was for over $8 million for failing to pay towards his loans. And U.S. Bank was seeking to receive over 80 of his properties.
Before we called the case on the record, I asked the attorneys to come in to the chambers just to talk.
This is the judge, Michael Hanrahan. The judge goes over some of the details of the case, how much money Tomblin owes, what the judge heard from both parties in chambers. But after that, he lets everyone know that no big decisions are going to be made here.
I am deciding that today is not the day to decide the petition for receivership. The main basis for that is that this is a business dispute that's relatively complex. There's a lot of moving parts. Some of the issues...
Test.
After that, we had a little check-in in the court's hallway, and I asked your take, since you've been the one that's really been following this case.
It's interesting reading legal briefs. It's like when you're reading through those, they're trying to make their case individually, and so it looks like these two just hate each other and can't stand each other, and there's no way they could reconcile. And then you see it happen in person, and they're like, yeah, we might be able to work something out. And no idea.
I think for me, something that stood out was something that was familiar. And it was a delay tactic. And it's kind of the same thing that we experienced trying to get in touch with Tomblin for this story. And when we were in the courtroom, that's something that it seems like Judge Hanrahan called Tomblin's attorney out for because of a last-minute filing.
Pardon, your recent filing was pretty recent. March 10th. It was 11 pages and a lot of documentation, not all of which I looked at. But I don't want that to happen again.
It seems like Tomblin's attorney kind of waited to the last minute to drop a pretty big document dump to the court and for the judge to read, which it sounds like he didn't appreciate. And it seems like a stalling tactic. And it's going to be really interesting what that means because, as we know, the city is also coming after these properties and coming after any sort of capital that Tomblin's holding on to at the moment. So you've got what it feels like are 2 entities, the city and then the U.S. Bank, that both want whatever Tomblin has. I'm Jimmy Gutierrez.
And I'm Sam Woods. We're reporters with WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. And throughout the last 2 episodes, we've shown you how out-of-state landlord David Tomblin and Highgrove Holdings operate as a business, one that keeps rents as high as possible while doing as little upkeep as possible.
For the past decade, Tomblin and his LLCs have been buying up properties across the north side of Milwaukee, over 250 total. And during that time, he has racked up countless code violations, been labeled a public nuisance, both his properties and his business practices, and all because of that, one of his biggest lenders, U.S. Bank, and the city of Milwaukee are coming for him and his properties through a little-used law called receivership.
Today, we're diving deep into receivership, how this has played out before in the city's history, and what can residents in Tomlin's properties expect. And then, finally, we talk with David Tomblin.
The idea of a public nuisance is one of those things that the public probably doesn't see a lot or hear a lot about.
This is West Allis City Attorney Cale Decker.
The definition is quite broad. It just says any condition that might impact the public rights, negatively impact the public rights.
Decker was the assistant city attorney in Milwaukee the last time the city rolled out a receivership charge. This was against the notorious landlord Elijah Muhammad Rashid.
In that case, what he would do is he would typically not repair his properties until ordered to do so by the city, effectively making the city his property manager. And even then, he would accomplish those repairs in a way that were substandard or were likely to repeat. Those are the types of things that the city accused him of, as well as the public nuisance angle included all of his code violations that were unrepaired in a timely manner. There were a number of different theories, but those are the primary ones in which the city alleged against Mr. Rashid.
I have a number of questions on how this process works, right? So one, who decides who gets to be the receiver? Are there like scheduled check-ins, like we're going to check in 6 months, make sure this receiver is actually, not continuing the public nuisance, right? Is there ever a time where it's like, okay, now the receiver's done their job, this can go back to, in this case, into Rashid's hands? Once it's appointed, how it actually works months or years down the line?
So the concept of receiver always starts with one of the parties asking for a receiver to be appointed. Ultimately, the court decides who that is. The court will often ask the parties if they have any preferences or any suggestions as to who could be the receiver, but ultimately the court makes that decision. It's important because that person is then responsible to the court, so the judge has to not only agree with who that person is, but also has to decide the terms in which that receivership will exist. So does that mean monthly check-ins? Does it mean that receiver is good for, they can do their work until a certain event happens? I think in the receivership case for Rashid, every month or two, that receiver would provide a written report to the court on the ongoing efforts that the receiver was making in trying to fix up properties and organize rent rolls, ensure that properties, when there were code violations that had urgent needs, were getting addressed.
Sam, can I ask a dumb question? What happened to Rashid and his properties? Did this work?
Not a dumb question. But first off, there are actually 2 receivership charges happening at the same time. So one is against Elijah Muhammad Rashid that Cale Decker is running through right now. The other was against another problem landlord, Mohammed Chowdhury. In Chowdhury's case, the receiver took him out of business. For Rashid, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Originally, Rashid's properties weren't put into receivership, but when it became clear that he wasn't going to abate the nuisance on his own, the court appointed a receiver. And while his properties were managed by a receiver, he actually transferred ownership of the properties to his family. So to answer your question, did receivership evict Rashid? It's complicated. And so I wanted to ask Decker what he thought of receivership and how effective is it really?
Given all the options currently out there in the law, I think it's the most effective one. In the past, there's been attempts to render forfeitures against property owners, or you build up municipal court violations because of code violations. That is only effective if the person pays. You've also had things like issuing orders against property owners saying that should fix it, and it works. But if you're issuing orders every single time and the person doesn't do anything preventively and instead just sits around and waits for orders, it's also not as effective. So like anything else in code enforcement or police work or anything else like that, the general tools will work 80% of the time. The remaining 20% takes a more specialized tool, which will work 80% of that time. You're always going to keep going until there's a small number where all your general tools are just not working. This is the opportunity, and this is the type of tool that is sort of the last one. And that is because it directly impacts the revenue stream. That is the one thing that a property owner needs to make their properties worth it. They need a revenue stream. A receivership cuts that revenue stream to zero. So that's why it is the most impactful. It's also the most work. It's also used the least for that reason.
While it's impossible to know for sure if receivership will ultimately evict Tomblin from Milwaukee, given that he owes over $8 million to just one lender in U.S. Bank and other lenders are suing him as well, It seems from the outside that Highgrove is desperate for income. And Jimmy, I'm no lawyer, I'm no banker, I'm no economist, but looking from the outside, it's hard to see Tomblin and Highgrove survive without months or even years of collecting income from rent.
That's a tall task, and I think maybe what we should just do is ask him. Because after months of reaching out, we finally got him on a call. Highgrove Holdings founder and corporate out-of-state landlord, David Tomblin. That's next. Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you for jumping on and talking with us.
Great, great. I know Valia is going to be joining us here in just a second.
Okay. Would you like to wait for her?
Yeah, if you don't mind, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Tomblin agreed to a Zoom call with us as long as his PR rep could join in, and they gave us a 15-minute window. We started out by asking about Deshaun Harris's property and fact-checking what we could. She was the Tomblin tenant from episode 1.
We did tour the place, and there are a number of things that she's, not particularly happy about. Giant hole underneath her porch, bathtub knob stripped, overgrowth in the backyard with wires running through, and a bullet that's been lodged in the wall since last summer. She seems like that's, to her, hasn't rose to being a good landlord of kind of fixing those issues. So I want to give you the chance to speak to that.
Sure, I appreciate it. First of all, my company in Highgrove, very, very, very much committed to the city of Milwaukee in spite of all that's going on right now. We're in lockstep with the city of Milwaukee. And
jumping in here because this goes on for about the first minute of his answer. Lots of deflecting before getting into Deshaun's claims specifically.
Things about the bathtub and everything like that, we have nothing on record about that. That's number one. The bullet holes in the window were taken care of. And I understand the bullet hole in the wall, because I double checked that. We're all taken care of in December with that. And the situation of the hole underneath, that should have been taken care of. That was a water line replacement that we did back. I don't have the exact date.
Hey, David,
was a water line.
Yeah. Can we jump in here real quick? Thank you for answering those. I think Sam's got something else.
Yeah, so mentioned the window that the bullet came through was taken care of in December, and that the hole underneath the porch should have been taken care of. Now, Deshaun notes that the bullet window, that was 5 months afterwards, and it was, obviously December here gets a little cold, and also curious what happened to, the hole should have been taken care of, so what happened?
Well, I explained this to her. I said, Ms. Harris, this is not an emergency item. We will get to it. You have people going on vacation. You were going into wintertime. Our priorities were DNS, health and safety issues. And I explained that to her. I said, but we would get there. Her concern was getting it done before her family came out for Christmas time. And I said, we would make sure that was done. And it was done prior to her time with Christmas time.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, David. Appreciate you jumping in there. I just want to follow up on, you had talked about having like a really strong relationship and working relationship with the city. At the same time, the city has filed lawsuits against you and claiming for this receivership law that they're looking for to reclaim a whole bunch of properties or to abate them and get them in working order. So I guess, what is your take on the receivership? Because it feels like this is pretty historic that they've teamed up with Common Ground and tenants here, and that they've found enough to find fault with in being a public nuisance, both in your properties and the way that you run a business.
Yes. Again, we're committed to the city of Milwaukee. We're committed to our residents. 2 years ago, I had a meeting with the mayor. He introduced me to Claire Schlocker of her office that I work with. And working with Claire and with the head of the DNS, we were able to put our properties into special enforcement. And that's worked out very well. We have an assigned inspector. There are two classifications. We have the major properties that what you saw in the news that were part of this contractors walking off that take permits, architects, plans submitted, all of those types of things. And all that's going to be done, by the way, with our new financing coming in, which the city knows about, our lenders know about, they're working with us by the end of the year. But right now, we are current on any current DNS things that are coming up. And these are more of the minor situations with that.
I think a lot of people are going to hear this and are going to hear and see all of the reporting see the press conferences and that half of your portfolio is snagged up in this receivership law. You've got U.S. Bank, which we sat in on, one of these court cases with your attorney and their attorneys. It's a lot of work that has to happen. What are your future plans for Milwaukee? Like, you have a lot of properties that I think from what we're hearing from not just Deshaun, but Samantha and Ishan and Ebony and all of these folks had substandard issues in your property specifically.
In terms of our lenders and everything like that, one of the mistakes we did was we stopped bringing in investor money because we had the problems with the contractors. We had problems with COVID. We had problems with inflation. We have not evicted anybody because our tenants are suffering right now. We have not evicted anybody since September of 2024 on the record.
There's a lot being thrown out here that we're going to go over in a second. But what you should know is that while we had Tomblin in this call, he did admit that Highgrove made some mistakes, but he never apologized. Not to the city of Milwaukee, not to his paying tenants, not to Deshaun. No contrition for a lot of the people's experiences in his properties.
We both need to be somewhere in 9 minutes.
No.
We went a little long.
Yeah, appreciate
it. We appreciate it.
We'll be with you some more.
Okay.
More to continue. Thank you, everybody. We'll be out there with you.
Recording stopped.
Sitting with his tape right now, I think we just need to go over some of these claims that he made and just fact check. And I think the first thing that we need to do is that he made this claim of falling behind on his properties, which he repeated a few times because 3 of his contractors went belly up during COVID. So what should we know about that?
Yeah, so Common Ground and Tomblin himself made clear that those contractors were only responsible for about 20 homes. And as a reminder, that's less than 10% of his Milwaukee portfolio. And remember, Common Ground is the organization that's been at the heart of organizing his tenants to speak out, documenting their issues with his properties, and really driving this lawsuit to the city.
Okay, so another huge claim that was made is that there are no open DNS claims or code violations, basically, on his properties. He tried to specify that's only over the past 6 months, but what should we know about that?
You remember talking with John Johnson from Marquette?
Yep.
So Johnson put together a whole spreadsheet of open code violations on his properties and listing some as recent as January. And now it's possible that Tomblin took care of everything in the last couple of weeks between when that list was generated and when he talked to us. But given that he was generating dozens of new violations about every other week at the time, I do have my suspicions about that claim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that document, so I'd have to say same. There's something else that he brought up multiple times that we need to talk about, and that was his stated commitment to the city of Milwaukee. He sounded dead set that he is not going anywhere, even if the city and U.S. Bank are coming for his properties. I guess that's a claim only time will tell, but we do need to think about the other players in this story.
Evan Goyke and the city attorney's office are pushing hard. They've studied Decker's takedown of previous problem landlords, and they're new to the office, and they see this as a big opportunity to send a message and start a legacy.
And we know Kevin Solomon and Common Ground are all in. They're still sending out press releases to this day, organizing press conferences, and even exposing some new issues Tomblin tenants are facing. And of course, there is Deshaun Harris.
So around early March, a woman stopped by Deshaun's house. She told Deshaun that her home was sold and that it didn't belong to Tomblin anymore. This was the first Deshaun had heard about it, and it made her really nervous because she had all these questions. What did this mean for the rent that she already couldn't afford? Or all of the work she was still waiting to be done on her home?
That it wasn't no surprise, but it was just, how you sell this and don't send nothing in your tenants that you sold the property to somebody else. It's scary because you don't know if this person gonna ask you to move or what. If you don't got the resources, don't got common sense to know. So my hope is that by being in transition, as this property's supposed to have been sold now, I hope it don't end that way for me. You see what I'm saying? It can go any way.
While the new owners have yet to tell Deshaun what their plans are with the property, Common Ground isn't waiting. They're planning to rehab Deshaun's home soon, fixing her bathroom, patching the bullet hole in her dining room wall, and making the home livable again.
And when it comes to the sale of her home, I think there's a final note to take away from it. Even though Tomblin doesn't own the property anymore, it's the way that it was handled that tells us something about him and his business model. These properties are commodities. so are the residents and the people that live in them. There was no outreach here like he told us there is on the Zoom call, where he really talked up his relationship with residents.
And while Highgrove's property empire may have peaked in Milwaukee, out-of-state corporate landlords are still a problem, one that Common Ground and the city of Milwaukee will be keeping an eye on. And what happens with Tomblin could set a precedent for how the community takes on future negligent landlords.
So y'all be safe.
You too.
You as well.
Y'all need to get in touch with me.
Got you.
No.
That was the final installment of How to Evict Your Landlord, a series produced by WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez and Lake Effect's Sam Woods. Parts 1 and 2 are available at WUWM.com. Tune into Lake Effect tomorrow to hear the entire series.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from your local NPR station, WUWM. Subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast to hear more great stories about Milwaukee.